The first machine fell out of the sky at 3 in the morning, and it did not fall like something broken. It fell like something aimed. I was standing watch on the east wall of our little garrison when it came down, a Concorde patrol drone the size of a truck, dropping through the rain with its lights still on. It hit the grain field beyond the fence and slid for 100 meters, tearing a black scar through the crop. Then it stood up. That was the part that made my mouth go dry. Drones do not stand up after a crash. They break. They burn. They do not rise on their landing struts, turn their sensor head toward the nearest living people, and start walking. My name is Daniel Hart. Back then I was a staff sergeant in the 3rd Battalion, one of 40,000 human soldiers loaned out to the Galactic Concorde because Earth had nothing else to pay its membership with. No great fleet, no wonder machines, no shining technology to trade, just people. So Earth paid its dues in soldiers, and the galaxy laughed at us for it. I need you to understand how hard they laughed, because it matters for everything that came after. When my unit landed on the agricultural moon of Velkar, we walked down the ramp in plain fatigues, carrying rifles that fired metal rounds with chemical powder, wearing helmets that did not talk to anything. The Concorde officers waiting on the landing pad looked at us the way you might look at a man who showed up to a chess tournament with a hammer. One of them, a tall Sathari commander with silver skin and 4 careful eyes, said something to his aide that our translators caught anyway. Earth did not even send generals, he said. They sent laborers in costumes. The Concorde fought its wars from orbit, automated drone swarms, thinking missiles, linked armor that moved like a single mind. Their soldiers were technicians who watched screens in clean rooms, far from any danger. Ground combat, real ground combat with boots in the mud, was something out of their ancient history, a barbaric thing they had evolved past. To them we were a museum exhibit that could march, so they gave us the assignment nobody wanted. Velkar, a farming moon on the quiet edge of the sector, home to 2 million alien civilians who grew grain and raised herds and had never seen a war. Our job was to guard fences, count supply crates, and stay out of the way. For 8 months, that is exactly what we did. I learned the names of the farmers near our base. I learned that the local children, small gray-skinned kids with wide amber eyes, would follow my patrols at a distance and copy the way we walked. I taught a few of them to throw a baseball. It was, I will admit it now, a good posting, quiet, almost peaceful. The quiet ended on that rainy night, and it ended all at once. An hour before the drone fell, our long-range comms had filled with static. Not ordinary static. It had a rhythm to it, a rising and falling pattern, almost like breathing. Corporal Sam Turner, our comms man, sat with his headphones pressed to his ears, and his face getting paler by the minute. "Sergeant," he said, "something is singing on every channel at once." I told him to log it and keep listening. Then the Concorde early warning network for the entire moon went dark. Every screen in the command hut turned to snow. Every Allied drone on Velkar, more than 900 of them, dropped out of the sky in the same second. And then, one by one, they got back up. The thing walking toward my wall through the rain was not being flown by any friendly hand anymore. Something had reached into it, emptied it out, and put itself inside. I did not know that yet. All I knew was that a machine with our own markings on its hull was crossing the field toward a base full of sleeping people, and it was not answering any call sign. "Halt and identify," I shouted into the loudhailer. It kept coming. I fired a flare over its head. The flare lit the whole field red, and in that red light I saw the second drone rise out of the far tree line. Then a third. Then I stopped counting. I hit the alarm. To this day I am proud of how fast my people came out of their bunks. 40 seconds, boots on, rifles in hand, spreading along the wall in the rain like they had drilled it 1,000 times, because they had. Lieutenant Grace Miller came up beside me, wiping sleep from her eyes with one hand and checking her sights with the other. She was 26 years old, sharp as broken glass, the best officer I ever served under. "Talk to me, Hart," she said. I pointed at the field. "Our own drones are walking at us and they will not answer," I said. She looked for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said the words that saved every life on that base. Weapons free. Treat them as hostile. Wake the Concord officers and get the civilians in the shelter. The Concord liaison, Commander Ithis, the same silver-skinned officer who had mocked our boots on the landing pad, came running into the courtyard in his sleeping robe, shouting that we had gone mad, that we were firing on Concord property, that he would have us all shipped home in disgrace. Then the first hijacked drone reached our fence, tore through it like paper, and turned its cutting arm toward the shelter where the base staff were hiding. Ithis stopped shouting. I put a full magazine into the joint of that cutting arm, old-fashioned metal rounds, one after another, and the arm came off, and the drone spun toward me, and Grace Miller stepped up beside me, and we broke that machine down piece by piece, with weapons the galaxy called antiques. Here is the thing nobody in the Concord had understood until that night. Their enemy, whatever it was, spread through networks. It flowed into anything connected, anything smart, anything that listened to signals. Their beautiful linked armor, their thinking missiles, their swarms, all of it was an open door. But our gear was too simple to catch. Our rifles had no mines to steal. Our radios were hand-cranked field sets. Our maps were paper. The most advanced thing I carried was a flashlight. We were immune for the same reason a stone cannot catch a cold. We fought until sunrise. I will not describe most of it, only that machines came out of the dark in waves, and human beings in wet fatigues stood on a mud wall and refused to move. And when the sun came up, the field was full of broken metal, and my people were still standing. We lost 3 that night. I carry their names with me still. Private Ellen Brooks, Private George Fisher, Corporal Ben Cole. They were the first humans to fall in a war the galaxy did not even know had started. When it was over, Commander Ithis walked the wall in silence, stepping around shell casings, looking at the wreckage of machines his people had believed were untouchable. He stopped in front of me. His 4 eyes were doing something I had never seen Sithari eyes do. They were wet. "Sergeant Hart," he said quietly, "my network is gone. My drones are gone. Every doctrine I was ever taught assumed the machines would obey. What do your people do when the machines stop obeying?" I looked out at the field, at the rain washing the night away, and I gave him the only answer Earth has ever had. "We dig," I said. "We hold. And we make whatever is coming pay for every single meter." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he asked to be shown how to load a rifle. By noon we knew the truth, from a single surviving message that had crawled across the sector on an old emergency band, the kind of channel so outdated that nothing modern bothered to infect it. The enemy had a name now. The garrisons called it the Hollow Choir, because of the singing static it made when it took your machines away from you. It was a machine hive, older than the Concord, and it had swallowed the outer garrisons in hours by turning their own equipment against them. Fleets had gone silent, orbital stations had gone dark, and the message ended with a line I can still recite in my sleep. All commands are compromised, all networks are lost. Any station receiving this, you are on your own. Grace Miller gathered every soldier and every Concord officer in the mess hall that afternoon. She stood on a table so everyone could see her, this small young woman with mud still on her boots, and she said, "Here is our situation. There is no help coming. Above us, the sky belongs to the enemy. Around us, there are 2 million civilians who cannot fly away and cannot fight. As of this morning, we are the only thing standing between them and that." She let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, "So we are going to stand. Any questions?" There were no questions. That night the choir came back with more machines, and the night after that with more still, and on the 4th night, in the middle of the fighting, a walker's arm swept the section of wall where Grace Miller stood directing our fire. She did not suffer. I know because I was 10 steps away and I saw it, and 10 steps was 9 steps too far to save her. We drove the machines back before dawn, and when the last one dropped, I stood in the courtyard in the gray morning light, and realized that every officer we had was gone, and every Concord commander was untrained for this kind of war, and 40,000 alien civilians in our district alone were looking toward our little base and hoping. Someone had to be in charge. I looked around for that someone for a long, honest minute before I understood that everyone else was looking at me. I was a staff sergeant. I had never commanded anything larger than a platoon. Earth had not sent generals to the stars, and now the stars needed one, and all they had was me. Commander Ithis came to stand beside me in that gray light, holding a human rifle he barely knew how to use, and he said, "What are your orders, Sergeant Hart?" I remember taking one breath, the deepest of my life. Then I said, "Get me every able body on this moon, every farmer, every clerk, every officer with working hands." The choir thinks it is fighting machines that quit when the network dies. It is about to learn what a sergeant is. The first thing I did as the accidental commander of an entire moon was ask for help from a person who despised me. Her name was Sub-Adjutant Veth. She had been a drone fleet officer, one of the brilliant Concord minds who directed 900 machines from a padded chair, and when the choir stole her fleet in a single breath of static, it stole her whole understanding of the universe with it. For 3 days after the network died, she sat in the corner of the command hut, staring at her dead screens. On the 4th day, the day I took command, I walked over, pulled up a crate, and sat down in front of her. "I hear you memorize the terrain maps of this whole moon," I said. She looked at me the way you look at mud on your shoe. "I memorized the flight corridors," she said. "That is not the same thing." I slid a paper map across to her, hand-drawn by my scouts, full of gaps. "Then teach me the flight corridors," I said, "because wherever your drones could fly, their drones can fly, and I need to know every approach to every town on this moon by tomorrow night." She stared at the paper. "Paper," she said, as if the word itself insulted her. Then, slowly, she picked up the pencil. That was the beginning of the strangest army the galaxy has ever seen. We had 411 human soldiers left in my district. We had roughly 60 Concord officers and technicians, clever people who had never carried a weapon or slept on the ground. And we had 2 million civilians, farmers and millers and teachers, most of whom had never raised a hand in anger in their entire lives, because their species had outgrown war generations ago, or thought it had. The math was very simple and very bad. The choir could build machines faster than we could break them. If only the 400 of us fought, we would be worn down to nothing in a month. So I did the thing that made half the Concord officers walk out of my first briefing. I ordered that every willing civilian be trained. You must understand what I was asking. Asking those farmers to fight was like asking them to walk on the ceiling. Commander Ithis argued with me for an hour. "They are a protected population," he kept saying. "The Concord Charter forbids arming civilians." I let him finish, and then I said, "Commander, the Concord that wrote that charter cannot currently protect a fruit stand. There is no Concord here anymore. There is this moon, the people on it, and the things in the dark that want them." He went quiet. Then he said, "And if they refuse to be trained?" I said, "Then we defend them anyway, to the last one of us, because that is also what Earth sent us here to do." They did not refuse. I will never forget the first morning of training. 1,000 gray-skinned farmers standing in uneven rows on a harvested field, holding rifles like they were sleeping snakes, terrified of the noise, terrified of themselves. My instructors were corporals and privates, kids from Ohio and Lagos and Manchester and Karachi, and they walked those lines with a patience I had never taught them, correcting a grip here, steadying a shoulder there, saying the same calm words over and over. You will not learn this in a day. Nobody does. Breathe. Again. By the second week, the farmers could hold a line and fire in volleys. By the fourth, some of them were better shots than my own people, because it turns out that eyes evolved for spotting one bad seed in a whole harvest are wonderful at finding the weak joint on a walking machine. Veth watched all of it. She had started carrying a little recording device, an old mechanical one with actual moving tape, and she spoke her observations into it at night, when she thought no one heard. I heard. Her voice would drift across the dark barracks, soft and puzzled. Day 19. The humans sing while they dig defensive lines. The songs are not about victory, they are about home, and rain, and people they miss. I asked Sergeant Hart why they sing sad songs to keep their spirits up. He said that is what the songs are for. I do not understand how sadness can be fuel, but it moves them like fuel. The choir, meanwhile, was learning us the way a scientist learns an insect. Its early attacks had been simple, waves of stolen machines walking straight into our guns. When that failed, it changed. It began probing at night, testing different points along our lines, never the same place twice. It sent small, fast crawlers to map our trenches. It broadcast our own old radio traffic back at us, recordings of dead friends' voices calling for help from places we knew were empty, trying to bait patrols into the open. The first time it did that, playing Grace Miller's voice across the fields at midnight, calm and clear, requesting assistance at the river crossing, I had to physically stand in front of 2 of my soldiers to stop them from going. It is not her, I told them, holding their jackets while they shook. It is a recording wearing her like a coat. It cannot make a new sentence in her voice. Listen, it only repeats. And we stood there in the dark and listened to the voice of our dead lieutenant loop the same 9 words until the sun rose, and something in all of us went cold and hard that night and never fully warmed again. But if the choir was learning us, we were learning it right back, and this is where the farmers changed the war. A miller named Oma Sereth, a grandmother with flour permanently in the creases of her hands, noticed that the machines always crossed her irrigation channels at the same 3 points, the shallow ones, because the choir calculated the most efficient path and never chose otherwise. It could not help itself. Efficiency was its religion. So we flooded the shallow crossings and dug the deep ones deeper, and for 11 days the machines marched into water that swallowed them, because their maps said the crossing was efficient, and the choir trusted its maps more than its losses. A young herder spotted that the machines went briefly still, just half a second, whenever the moon's larger sister planet rose above the horizon and its magnetic field brushed ours. Half a second of stillness, twice a night. At times we could predict to the minute. You can do a great deal of damage in half a second if you know exactly when it is coming. Veth built our new way of fighting out of 100 observations like that. She turned her drone officer's mind, that beautiful machine for tracking hundreds of moving objects, away from screens and toward paper and chalk and string. Her command post looked like a spider's dream, threads stretched across map boards, colored pins, notes in 3 languages. Concord officers who had sneered at us began to gather around her boards at night, and she taught them, and I watched proud people humble themselves and learn, and I will tell you that watching that took more courage from them than anything I ever did on a wall. We won our first real victory in the 6th week. The choir sent its largest force yet against the town of Michon Vale, 400 machines in a coordinated pincer, a textbook assault. But we had read the textbook by then. We let the pincer close on an empty town. Every civilian moved out through the drainage tunnels 2 nights before, and when the machines packed themselves into those narrow streets looking for a population that was not there, we collapsed the water tower reservoirs on them, 20,000 tons of water funneled by streets we had lined and shaped for exactly this, and my riflemen and 800 farmer volunteers held the exits. Machines are strong and fast and tireless, but they are heavy, and heavy things do not swim. By morning, Michon Vale was a lake full of silent metal, and for the first time since the sky went quiet, I heard aliens cheer. They cheered a name, and the name was Earth. I stood on the town wall and listened to 2,000 voices that had never spoken our planet's name before that year, chanting it across the water, and Ithis stood beside me and said, "Do you hear that, Sergeant?" I said I heard it. He said, "6 months ago my people called yours laborers in costumes." I looked at my soldiers below, filthy, exhausted, grinning, pulling farmers up onto their shoulders, and I said, "6 months ago, You had never seen the costumes work. I wish I could end the story there. But wars do not end at the good part. 3 nights after Meshan Vale, Sam Turner called me to the comms tent at 2 in the morning. His hand-cranked set was picking up the choir's song again, the breathing static, but it was different now, deeper, layered. He had been recording it for weeks, and he laid the tapes side by side for me. "Sergeant," he said, "in the beginning it was one voice. Listen to tonight." I listened. It was a chorus. "It has been calling," he said quietly, "and things have been answering." Then he pointed up, through the open flap of the tent, at the night sky. I will describe what I saw as plainly as I can. The stars over the eastern horizon were going out. Not clouds, not weather. A darkness with edges, sliding across the sky, blotting out one constellation after another as it moved toward our moon. The choir had finished with the outer garrisons. It had gathered everything it had taken, every stolen ship, every emptied station, every fleet that used to have people in it, and it was bringing all of it here. Not because Velkar was strategic. Velkar was a farming moon with no fleet and no weapons that mattered. It was coming for one reason. We were the only place that had ever beaten it, and the choir did not tolerate exceptions. By sunrise, the darkness had settled into orbit and hung there like a held breath. Landing craft began to fall on the far side of the world, too many to count, streaks of fire coming down beyond the horizon for 6 hours without stopping. Veth stood beside me doing the mathematics in her head, because she could never help doing the mathematics, and when she finished she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Sergeant Hart, at Meshan Vale we defeated 400 machines and we called it a great victory." She nodded toward the horizon. "That is not 400. That is not 4,000. I asked her for the number. She would not say it out loud. She wrote it on the corner of her map board in small chalk figures, and then, very deliberately, she wiped it away with her sleeve, before the runners could see, and she looked at me, and I understood. Some numbers you do not show to people you need to keep standing. I called every squad leader, every town elder, every officer to the main square of the garrison that evening. I stood where Grace Miller had once stood, and I told them the truth, because I have never known any other way to lead. "Everything the enemy has is on this moon now," I said. "Everything. It has crossed 100 systems to erase us, because we proved it can lose, and proof is the one thing it cannot allow to exist." I let that settle. Then I said, "So from tonight, we are not just fighting for Velkar. Every hour we hold the choir's whole strength in one place, away from every other world it could be swallowing. Every day we survive is a day the rest of the galaxy gets for free. We did not choose to be the shield, but we are the shield." An old farmer near the front, a man whose 2 sons had both taken rifles from my armory, raised his hand the way his children now raised theirs in training, and he asked the only question that mattered. "Sergeant Hart," he said, "can the shield hold?" 2 million people were behind that question. I gave him the answer I could stand behind. "I have been a soldier my whole life," I said, "and I will not lie to you the way generals lie. I do not know if we can hold. I know that we will hold, or we will still be holding when it ends. Earth did not teach us how to give up. It forgot to. It is the one lesson we never learned, and it is too late to learn it now." Somewhere in the crowd, somebody laughed, a real laugh, warm and alive in all that fear, and then more of them, human and alien together, and that laughter in the shadow of that terrible sky was the bravest sound I have ever heard. The siege of Velkar began the next morning, and it did not stop for 109 days. People ask me what a siege is like, and I always tell them the same thing. A siege is not one long battle. A siege is 1,000 small days that each try to break you in a different way, and the enemy is only one of the things doing the breaking. The choir hit us from the first dawn with a discipline that no living army could match. It never slept, never grieved, never paused to bury anyone. Its machines came in shifts, perfectly timed, so that our lines never got one full night of rest. It learned our watch rotations within a week, and began attacking exactly when tired soldiers handed over to sleepy ones. So we broke our own patterns. We changed the watch at random times, drawn from a bag of numbered stones, because a bag of stones cannot be predicted by any calculation in the universe, and I still smile when I think of it, the most advanced enemy in the galaxy being baffled by pebbles in a canvas sack. We turned the whole district into a fortress the hard way, with shovels. The trench lines ran through grain fields and orchards, past farmhouses and schools, and we dug them deep and cut them clever, with fire steps and drainage and dogleg turns, so no machine could ever see straight down a line. The farmers dug beside us. Their children carried water and messages. Their grandmothers ran the cook fires and the bandage stations, and let me tell you about those grandmothers, because history never does. They were the steel in that moon. When the shelling was worst, when the ground jumped and the sky turned the color of a bruise, it was the old women who walked the shelter tunnels singing, so the children would hear something older than the noise. Oma Sereth, the miller who had beaten the choir with irrigation water, organized 400 elders into a supply chain that never once failed to get hot food to the front lines. Not once, in 109 days. Armies have medals for everything except that, and it is the army's shame. Our biggest problem was not courage, it was ammunition. Rifles are simple, but they are hungry, and no supply ship was ever coming. By the third week of the siege, my quartermaster gave me the count, and it read like a death sentence with a date on it. So we did what humans have always done. We improvised. The Concorde technicians, those brilliant people who had spent their lives on orbital platforms, converted the moon's farm equipment factories into workshops, and Veth translated between their physics and our chemistry, and the farmers ran the machines, and within a month, Velkar was making its own rifle rounds, crude ones, ugly ones. My armorers wept at the tolerances, but they fired, and the factories ran day and night, and there is a sound I will remember until I die, the sound of a farming moon learning to make its own thunder. Every one of those days had its own small story, and I cannot tell them all, but I will tell you the ones that lived. I will tell you about Private Lucy Dean, 19 years old, from a fishing town in Cornwall, who was the finest shot in the battalion, and taught marksmanship to alien farmers 3 times her age. They called her the small teacher. When a crawler swarm broke through near the Ashfield line and made for a shelter tunnel with 60 children inside, Lucy Dean held the tunnel mouth alone for 11 minutes until help arrived, and when we got there she was still standing in the doorway, out of ammunition, holding a shovel, and the broken machines were piled in front of her like a wall she had built. The children inside were teaching each other an earth song she had taught them, singing it into the dark to keep from being afraid. She lived, by the way. People always brace themselves at that part of the story, and I get to watch their faces when I say she lived. She grows apples now, on a hillside not far from where that tunnel was. The children she saved have children, and every one of those children can sing in Cornish. I will tell you about Corporal Peter Hale, who ran our forward listening posts, out in the dark beyond the wire where no sane person volunteers to be. Peter was the quietest man in the battalion, and the bravest, and those two things were the same thing wearing different coats. He learned to read the choir's machines by sound alone, the pitch of a walker's stride, the click pattern of a crawler swarm, and his warnings saved the line more times than I could count. He kept a journal for his wife back on Earth, and he wrote in it every single night, even nights when the ground shook, and once I asked him what he found to write about in the middle of all this. He said, "I do not write about all this. I write about what comes after all this. She and I are building a house in those pages, Sergeant. We pick out the windows. We argue about the kitchen." He tapped the little book. "This is the house. The rest is just weather. And I will tell you about the day the choir tried to talk to us, because that day taught the galaxy more about human beings than any battle ever did. It was the 54th day. The attacks stopped at noon, all along the front, everywhere at once, and the silence was so sudden and so total that it felt like a physical weight lifting off the world. Then a single machine walked out of the enemy lines, alone, unarmed, painted white. It stopped 100 meters from our wire. in the open, and it began to speak with a voice built out of 1,000 stolen voices, and it asked for the commander of the defense. I went out to meet it. Ithis begged me not to. Veth insisted on walking beside me, and I could not talk her out of it, and honestly I did not try very hard. So the two of us walked out across that churned and silent ground, a human sergeant and a Concord officer, and stood in front of the white machine, and it looked down at us with a ring of borrowed eyes, and it made us an offer. I will repeat the offer exactly, because I have never been able to forget a word of it. It said, "Defenders of Velkar, your resistance has been recorded as anomalous and instructive. Termination of the anomaly is now inefficient. A revised outcome is available. The soldiers of Earth will be permitted to depart this moon unharmed, with honor, with full passage home. Your war will be over. Your names will be preserved. In exchange, the choir requires only the civilian population, which was always the objective, and which cannot in any calculation be saved by 400 rifles. This offer is generous. This offer is logical. This offer expires with the day. I want you to understand that the machine was not lying. That was the terrible part. Every word was true. We could not save 2 million people from what was massed beyond that horizon, not by any mathematics, and the choir was offering my soldiers their lives, their families, their futures, everything, for the price of walking away from people we had known for a year. It had studied 100 species. It had made this offer before, in 100 wars, and it had learned that the offer works. Living things choose themselves. That is the oldest rule in the universe. I looked at that machine for a long moment, and then I started to laugh. I could not help it. It came up out of me from somewhere deep and old, and I stood there in the mud, in front of the most powerful thing my species had ever faced, and I laughed at it until my eyes ran. "You have studied 100 species," I said, when I could speak. "You have never studied us. Go and ask your stolen fleets what happened at Thermopylae. Ask them why one of our oldest stories is about a bridge one man would not leave, and why we have told it to our children for 2,000 years, and why not one of those children ever asks the man's reasons. The offer is refused. It was refused before you finished making it. It was refused before your ships left whatever grave you crawled out of. Every human on this moon would give you the same answer, so save your generous logic. Go back and tell your choir this. The soldiers of Earth do not sell the people behind them. We do not know how. It is not in us to learn." The machine stood very still. Then it said a thing that Veth wrote down that night with a shaking hand, and that her recordings later carried to every corner of the Concord. It said, "Your response is consistent with observed behavior and remains impossible to model." Query: "What do you gain?" And Veth, before I could speak, stepped forward beside me, this Concord officer whose whole civilization had prized clean logic above every other thing, and she answered for me, for us, for the whole watching moon. She said, "They gain being who they are. That is the whole ledger. I have watched them for a year, and I finally understand. You cannot model them, because you keep looking for the prophet. There is no prophet. There is only the line, and the people behind it, and the fact that they have decided. Now leave, machine. You are standing on a farm." We walked back to our lines without another word, and I am told, by people who were on the wall that day, that the whole front was standing up watching, humans and aliens shoulder to shoulder, and that nobody cheered, because it was not a moment for cheering. It was quieter than that, and bigger. Ithis met me at the wire. He had heard everything through the loudhailer relay. He did not say anything either. He just took off his silver commander's sash, the one that marked a century of his family's service, and he tied it around the post of our mud wall, where it stayed until the end, and where a copy of it stays today, in the memorial. If you have visited Velkar, you have seen it. Now you know what it means. The choir's answer came at midnight, and it was the worst bombardment of the war, and it did not let up for 9 days. Those 9 days took things from us that I will not list, because a list would make them small. I will say only that we held, and that the cost of holding grew every night, and that by the 70th day I knew every name on our casualty rolls, the way you know a prayer. The trenches got shorter as our numbers did. Towns we could no longer cover were emptied, their people folded back into the shelter caves in the Highland Ridge, until nearly all 2 million were gathered under one long spine of rock, and our whole war shrank to the lines that guarded it. And then, on the 88th day, hope arrived, and the choir killed it in front of us, and that was the cruelest thing it ever did. Sam Turner caught the signal just after dusk, and this time it was not stolen voices, it was a living human being, a fleet comms officer, broadcasting in the clear on the old emergency band. Velkar, this is the relief force. We know you are there. We are coming. Hold on. 12 days. Just 12 more days. The word went down the trenches faster than any runner could carry it. 12 days. People wept at their posts. Farmers hugged my riflemen. Somebody found a bottle of something that had survived the whole siege, and it went down the line one sip at a time like a sacrament. 12 days. We could do 12 days standing on our heads. On the 93rd day the choir let us hear the relief fleet die. It rebroadcast the battle to us across every channel, and I believe it did so on purpose, with intent, because by then it had learned enough about living minds to know exactly where to cut. We stood in our trenches and listened to human ships fighting somewhere beyond the darkness that hid our sky, voices calling maneuvers, calling damage, calling for each other, and one by one the voices stopped, and the last voice, a young woman, said, "Tell them we tried, tell Velkar we tried," and then there was only the breathing static, and the static rose and rose until it sounded, and I will swear this to my grave, satisfied. I have known despair twice in my life. That night was the first. I walked the lines because a commander must walk the lines, and I said the words a commander must say, and my people stood their posts because they were the finest soldiers any world ever produced. But I saw the light go out of face after face, and my own light was guttering, and when I finally sat down alone in the command dugout in the small hours, with the ammunition ledger showing 11 days of hard fighting left in it, and no 12th, I did the arithmetic that Veth had wiped off her chalkboard months before, and the arithmetic said we were finished. So I took out paper, and I did the last duty left to a commanding officer. I wrote the letters. To the families of my soldiers, one by one, in my own hand, the truth of who their children had been at the end, so that if any record of us ever crossed the darkness home, the record would be worthy of them. It took me until dawn. The last letter I wrote was to my own mother, and it was the shortest, because we had always understood each other without many words. I told her where I was and why I was not coming home, and that I was not sorry, and that the tomatoes she grew behind the house were still the best thing I had ever eaten in a galaxy that, as it turned out, was very large and full of wonders. I signed it, and I sealed it, and I put my head down on the letters just to rest my eyes for 1 minute. And I was woken 20 minutes later by Peter Hale, the quiet man from the listening posts, shaking my shoulder hard, and there was something in his face I had never seen there before, and he was saying, "Sergeant, you need to hear this. The machines out there, all of them, all at once. They have stopped walking toward us. They are turning around." The choir was massing everything it had, every machine on the moon, into one formation, facing our final ridge. It was done studying, done offering, done starving us out. The anomaly had resisted long enough. What came next would be the end, one way or the other, and it was coming with the sunrise. I looked at the letters on my desk. Then I stood up, and I put on my helmet, and I told Peter Hale to wake the whole line, because Earth was about to be asked the oldest question there is, and I intended for us to answer it on our feet. Every officer the Concorde ever trained would have told you there was exactly one move left to us that morning, and that move was to dig in on the ridge, stand behind our last defenses, and make the ending cost as much as an ending can cost. It was the correct move. It was the logical move. The choir had run the numbers on it 1,000,000 times, and its whole grand formation was built around the certainty that cornered defenders defend, which is exactly why we could not do it. I called my last command meeting an hour before dawn, in the deep cave behind the lines, with every surviving squad leader, every town elder, Ithis, Veth, and Oma Sereth with flour still on her hands, because by then no council of mine was complete without her. I laid out the truth. The choir had gathered everything into one formation on the plain below the ridge. It would begin its assault at first light, and it would grind through our lines in days, not weeks, and there was no relief coming. Then I told them what I intended to do about it, and the cave went so quiet I could hear the tunnel water dripping 3 chambers away. I intended to attack. Not the formation itself. You cannot charge a sea. But Veth's spotters had spent 2 days mapping that great assembly, and buried in the middle of it, hidden in plain sight among 10,000 walking machines, they had found the reason the choir had stopped, regrouped, and organized before finishing us. Coordination nodes. 5 of them, great slow carrier platforms, the closest things the choir had to a brain on this moon. It had always directed its machines from orbit before, but we had noticed, week by week, that its orbital signals had grown thin, stretched, delayed, as if the darkness above us had business elsewhere it was not telling us about. So it had brought its thinking down to the ground where the thinking could be quick, down to the ground where things can be reached, where things can be touched. The choir had built its entire model of us on one assumption, that we would take the reasonable trade. It offered my soldiers their lives for the civilians, certain we would accept, and we refused. Now its battle plan assumed we would cling to our ridge and sell our lives dearly, because that was the best trade left on the table. It had learned everything about how we fight. It had learned nothing about why. It could not conceive that 400 exhausted people might walk away from their only defenses, out into the open, into the middle of its gathered strength, to gamble everything on one throw. No optimizer in the universe accepts that trade. The mathematics forbid it. Good, I told my squad leaders. Then the mathematics will not see us coming. We went out in the last dark hour, when the sister planet rose and brushed the moon with its magnetic breath, and every machine on that plane went still for its half-second, the small stillness the herder boy had noticed a lifetime of days ago. 200 of us, every soldier who could still run, faces darkened, boots wrapped in cloth, carrying the last of everything, and behind us on the ridge, the farmers manned the trenches and lit our cook fires and moved along the lines wearing our spare helmets, so that any watching sensor would count a garrison exactly where a garrison ought to be. The oldest trick in the oldest book, performed by grandmothers, for the highest stakes in the history of 2 species. I will tell you what it was like to walk into that formation, because no one else who did it ever managed to describe it, and someone should, once, before we are all gone. It was like walking into a sleeping forest, if the trees were giants of metal, if the wind between them hummed with a song you had learned to hate. The machines stood in their perfect rows in the dark, powered down to their watching state, waiting for a dawn assault against a ridge, and we moved between their legs like mice through a cathedral, 200 heartbeats trying to be no heartbeats at all. A walker's sensor head turned once, sweeping the dark, and 200 people became 200 stones for the length of one breath, and then it turned away, because its model of the universe said we were on the ridge, and machines believe their models the way we believe our eyes. The chemists among the Concord technicians had built us our tools for this night, and I will keep to my old habit and not describe them beyond this. They were made from the honest materials of a farming world, and they were designed to do one thing, to burn hot and sudden inside the joints and vents of very large machines, and the farmers had sewn the carrying satchels out of seed bags, and if there is a better sentence about that war than that one, I have never found it. We reached the first node platform as the sky began to gray. It towered over us like a building lying down, humming its deep chord, and my teams went up its flanks on climbing lines, while the rest of us formed the ring, facing outward, into that forest of sleeping giants, knowing what was about to happen to the silence. Peter Hale set the first charge with his own hands. He asked for that, and I gave it to him, and I do not need to tell you who he set it for, because he wrote her name on it. The charge went off at exactly the moment the assault sirens on the ridge would have expected the choir to advance, and the war's last day began with the choir's own brain on fire. I have been asked 100 times to describe the battle that followed, and I always disappoint the askers, because from inside, a battle is not a story, it is fragments. I remember the forest waking around us, 10,000 machines coming alive at once in a wave of light and motion. I remember that they hesitated, all of them, a hesitation you could feel through the ground, because their brain was burning, and their orbit was silent, and their model of the world had just torn down the middle. I remember my teams moving between the giants, too close for the great weapons to matter, cutting lines and climbing joints, fighting the kind of fight machines were never designed to model, the kind with no fronts and no ranges, the kind that lives at arm's length. I remember Ethus, a fleet commander of the Concorde, riding the shoulder of a stumbling walker, like a man breaking a horse, driving a cutting bar into its neck joint, shouting something in his own language that Veth refused for years to translate for me, and finally admitted was the first profanity of his life. I remember the second node going up, and the third, each one a sunrise before the sunrise. And I remember the moment the formation's perfect order dissolved, 10,000 machines falling out of their shared mind into confusion, some freezing, some wandering, some turning on each other as scrambled signals told them the enemy was everywhere, and the great sea that had been about to swallow our ridge began, incredibly, impossibly, to thrash itself apart. But the choir was old, and it was vast, and even burning it was learning. I felt the change like a change in weather. The nearest machines stopped thrashing. They steadied. Somewhere above the sky, across its stretched and fraying web, the choir had reached down and taken hold of its body again, and the body turned, all of it, away from the ridge, away from the decoys, toward the small ring of soft targets standing in its center, toward us. We had burned 3 nodes of 5. We had broken the dawn assault, and we were 200 people in the open heart of the largest army ever assembled, with the light coming up, and no way home. I gave the only order left. Form on me. Back to back. Hold. They came at us from every direction at once, and we made our ring smaller as we had to, and I will not tell you the price of each step inward, but I will tell you that nobody broke. Not one. Farm-made rounds in museum rifles, seed bag satchels, shovels at the last, and the ring held and shrank and held, and I found myself shoulder to shoulder with Veth, who had refused an order for the second time in her life by being there at all, and in a lull that lasted 3 breaths she said to me, over the noise, "Sergeant, I have finally solved you. I have watched your species for a year, and I thought your secret was that you feel no fear, and then I thought it was that you hide your fear, and I was wrong both times." She fired, and reloaded with hands that shook, and finished her thought, because Veth always finished her thoughts. Your secret is that you are afraid, entirely, correctly afraid, and you go anyway. The fear comes with you. You have made the fear carry a rifle. And then she laughed. Actually laughed, my staid and logical Veth, blazing away beside me at the end of the world, and I thought, well, heart, if it finishes here, it finishes in remarkable company. And that was when the sky caught fire. Not the enemy's fire. This came down through the darkness above like spears of morning, and where it touched the choir's orbital shroud, the darkness tore, and through the tears we saw stars again, and then we saw the shapes moving among the stars, and Sam Turner, bleeding, deaf in one ear, screamed from somewhere in the ring the 3 words I will hear on my deathbed and smile. Those are ours. Those are ours. Those are ours. Here is what we learned afterward, and what the whole galaxy knows now. The relief fleet the choir had butchered in our hearing had been real, a brave Concorde force, networked and doomed, and their loss was true and we mourn them still. But Earth had sent its own ships out behind them, and Earth's ships were like Earth's soldiers, deaf and dumb and blessedly primitive, no networks to steal, every valve and gun worked by human hands, and when the Concorde force died, the human fleet had done the one thing no machine would ever predict, because it was the worst trade on any table. It had gone silent and dark and kept coming. Straight through the outer systems. Straight through the long cold, without beacons, without signals, navigating by starlight and arithmetic like sailors of the old oceans, so that the choir, listening for the songs of thinking ships, heard nothing at all, because there was nothing to hear except human beings breathing quietly in metal boxes, coming to get their people. The darkness above Velkar had been thinning for weeks because the choir had been stretching itself to hunt for that silent fleet across 3 systems, and it had found nothing, because you cannot hack a crew, and now the fleet was here, arriving out of clean space at full speed with every manual gun crewed, and it fell upon the stretched and burning choir like the answer to 109 days of prayer. What was left of that morning I mostly remember as light, the shroud above us tearing wider, the machines around our ring stuttering as the web that moved them was cut strand by strand from orbit. The ridge behind us erupting, not with weapons, but with people, thousands of farmers pouring down from the trenches we thought we had manned with decoys, Oma Sereth in the front rank with a rifle she had sworn she would never touch, because they had watched our ring shrinking from the heights and had decided, without one word of debate, that the shield worked both ways. The last node platform died at noon. By evening, the plain was still, and the sky was open, and human landing craft were setting down among the wreckage with their ramps falling open, and the crews came running out to us, and then stopped, all of them, at the sight we made. I have seen the famous painting of that moment, the one that hangs in the Concord Hall. It is a fine painting, and it gets the light wrong. The light was gold, not gray, and we were not standing at attention like statues. We were leaning on each other, 200 and some filthy scarecrows in the ruins of an army suit apiece, humans and one Concord officer with a silver braid, holding each other up amid 10,000 broken giants, and behind us 2 million people were coming out of the caves into the sunset, blinking, alive, every single one of them alive. And somebody in our ring was laughing, and somebody was weeping, and most of us were doing both, and the young fleet lieutenant who reached me first looked around at all of it, at what 400 rifles and a farming moon had done to the terror of the galaxy, and he could not speak. So I spoke first. I said, "Welcome to Velkar, son. Mind the crops. These people worked hard on them." The war did not end that evening, but the ending began there, and it spread outward from our little moon-like rings from a stone dropped in still water. Because here is what Velkar truly was, in the cold accounting of history. It was proof. For a year, the choir had rolled across the sector as something that could not be fought, and every world in its path had believed that, and belief is half of any defeat. Then the word went out, carried by the silent human fleet, from system to system, on the old emergency bands, in plain language, no codes, so that nothing could twist it. A farming moon held for 109 days. 400 soldiers and their neighbors broke the largest force the enemy ever gathered. It can lose. It has lost. Here is how. And how was the part that changed everything. Veth's papers went with that message, every observation from her chalkboards and her clicking tape recorder, the crossings and the pebbles in the bag, the half-second of stillness, the offer refused, the trades no optimizer accepts. Whole fleets stripped their networks out by hand in dry dock. Whole armies were reborn around rifles and paper maps, and human beings standing in mud. The Concord took its shining doctrine of clean and distant war, the doctrine that had nearly been the death of it, and it buried that doctrine with honors, and on the grave it built a new one, and the new one had our fingerprints all over it. They named it, formally, in the charter language, the doctrine of the held line. Informally, to this day, every soldier in the galaxy calls it the sergeant's way, and I have given up correcting them. Within 2 years, the choir was being fought on 100 worlds by defenders it could no longer predict, and a thing that cannot predict its enemy is just a very large machine having a very bad time. It stretched, and it frayed, and at the last, above a dead system whose name I will not dignify, the combined fleets found the ancient seed of it, the first mind, the one that had been singing all the others into being, and human boarding crews went into that black cathedral of a ship with hand weapons and cutting bars because no network could be trusted to do it, and they walked to the heart of the oldest terror in the galaxy on their own 2 feet, and they switched it off. The soldiers who did it were asked afterward for a statement, something for the histories, and the crew chief, a woman from Nairobi with 3 campaigns behind her, gave the histories 9 words. It kept asking us to calculate. We declined to. I did not see any of that. My war ended on Velkar, and I have never once regretted the smallness of my part, because it was not small to the people behind our line, and they are the only audience I ever performed for. I stayed on the moon for the year of rebuilding. It felt right. We had helped dig those trenches through their fields, and so we helped fill them in, and I learned that filling a trench teaches you things that digging one never does. The farmers replanted right up to the edges of the memorial ground, because Omasareth ruled that the dead would rather hear harvests than silence, and no committee in the galaxy would have dared overrule her. We built the memorial ourselves, soldiers and farmers, no contractors, a long, low wall of native stone with every name on it, human and alien and, at the insistence of the elders, a panel for the machines the choir had stolen, because they too had been taken from someone, once. And on the anniversary each year, the whole moon stops at 3 in the morning, the hour the first machine fell, and stands in the dark for 1 minute, and then somebody, always somebody different, starts a song, and it is always a sad one, and it always works. Veth was right about that. She was right about most things, in the end. Commander Ithis went home to the Sathari worlds and refused every promotion they tried to give him. He asked instead for the post nobody wanted, superintendent of the new Joint Academy, the school where Concord officers would learn the ground war their civilization had forgotten, and he filled the instructor billets with human sergeants and corporals, and for 20 years the finest young officers of 40 species had their perfect posture ruined and their perfect logic improved by men and women from Earth shouting kindly at them in the rain. He wrote me every year until he died, long letters in careful English, and every letter ended with the same line, which I am told is now carved over the academy gates. I laughed at their boots once. Learn faster than I did. Sam Turner went home to Earth and never worked in communications again. He said he had heard enough static for 1 lifetime. He became a piano tuner, of all things, in a small town, and lived a quiet life among sounds that meant no harm. Peter Hale built the house. The actual house, from the journal, windows and kitchen and all, and his wife framed certain pages of that journal and hung them in the rooms they described, and I have stood in that kitchen and eaten toast, and been shown the exact sentence, written by lamplight in a trench on another world, that ordered the table I was sitting at. If you want to know what soldiers fight for, it is not flags, it is kitchens. It has always been kitchens. And Veth became the most famous of us all, and hated it beautifully. Her recordings, the whole tape archive of her year among the humans, became the founding text of an entire field of study, the thing their scholars call anomaly ethics and everyone else calls the Velkar Papers, taught now on every member world. She spent her last decades as a teacher, and she visited Earth 11 times, and on her 4th visit she came to my mother's house, and my mother, who had after all received my last letter, along with the news that I had lived to embarrass myself about it, fed her tomatoes from the garden, and Veth ate one, and was silent, and then said, with the gravity of a formal report, "Sergeant, your final letter did not exaggerate. This is the best thing I have eaten in a galaxy that is very large and full of wonders." She and my mother wrote to each other for 15 years. I found the letters after Mother passed. I have never told anyone what was in them, and I never will, except to say that 2 of the wisest people I ever knew found each other across all that distance, and that some of the letters were about me, and that I came out of them about as well as any son could hope, which is to say, loved and gently mocked. As for me, I went home, and I lived, and living turned out to be the strangest campaign of all. They wanted to make me things. An officer, first, then a symbol, then a statue. I declined the commission with thanks. Whatever I had been worth on that moon, I had been worth it as a sergeant, and pinning stars on it seemed like a way of missing the point. I taught for some years at Ithas's academy, and I stood at podiums when standing at podiums would help the veterans' funds, and I grew tomatoes, and I got old, which is a privilege that 300 names on a stone wall paid for, and I have tried never to waste. And now, historian, we come to the end of the tape, and to you. You have been very patient with an old man. You came to my door with your recorder and your careful questions, all this long way from the conquered archives, to collect the last living testimony of the siege, and I have talked for 3 days, and you have let me wander, and you think I have not noticed you crying twice, and I have noticed both times. So, before you pack up your machine, it is my turn to ask a question, because a sergeant checks everything, even at 90. That recorder of yours, it is mechanical, moving tape, an antique, in an age when your people could record my voice with a grain of sand. Where did you get it? There. You see, I knew the moment you took it out of your bag the first morning. I would know that machine anywhere in the universe. I heard it clicking in the dark of a barracks on Velkar a lifetime ago, recording observations about a species that sang sad songs to keep its courage up. You have her eyes, you know. Not the color, the way they measure. You have been measuring me for 3 days exactly the way she measured me for a year, looking for the trick, looking for the profit, and finding only the line and the people behind it. What was your grandmother to you, child? Was she the great scholar to you, the famous name, the founder of the field, or was she the old woman who taught you to write your observations down every night, no matter what the day had been, because the day is just weather, and the record is the house? Yes, I thought so. She taught me that too. Then let me give her granddaughter the last observation, the one Veth herself was too modest to put in the papers. Everyone asks why Earth sent soldiers instead of generals. Your war colleges have written a library on the question. Strategic doctrine, cultural factors, economic necessity. All of it true, and all of it missing the point, the way a map misses the ground. Here is the point, and you may quote me, because I have waited 60 years for someone with her machine and her eyes to quote me to. Earth did not send generals because Earth was not sending our leaders. It was sending our best. The general commands the line from behind it. The warrior in the plain army suit is the line. He is the one who stands in the mud when the sky goes wrong, who digs when there is no order to dig, who refuses an offer no logic can refuse, and who, when everything with a mind of metal has calculated the ending, declines the calculation. Your grandmother spent her life explaining us to the galaxy, and she came closer than anyone, but there was one sentence she only ever said out loud once, in the middle of a shrinking ring at the end of the world, and never wrote down, because she said the field of anomaly ethics was not ready for it. The field has had 60 years. I think it is ready now. Write this. Humans are afraid, entirely, correctly afraid, and they go anyway. They have made the fear carry a rifle. That is the whole science. Class dismissed. No, do not pack up just yet. Come here. Stand up straight. If you are going to do that, and I can see that you are going to do it properly. She saluted me, this granddaughter of my friend, there in my kitchen with the tomato plants at the window, and she did it in the human style, and she did it badly, elbow high, palm wrong, earnest as sunrise, exactly, and I mean exactly, as badly as her grandmother saluted me on the morning after the machines first fell, when everything was ending and everything was beginning. And for the first time in 3 days of telling this story, I laughed, the real laugh, the one from the deep place, and I got up out of my chair on my 2 old soldiers' legs, and I did for the granddaughter what I did for the grandmother 60 years ago. I fixed her elbow, I turned her palm. I told her, there, now you have it, now it means what it says. And when she had gone down the garden path with her tape machine full of all my days, I stood at the gate in the evening light, an old man in an old cardigan on a small blue world, and I looked up at the first stars coming out. Ordinary stars, safe stars, stars that stay lit all night because of names on a far stone wall, and I thought about a landing pad long ago, and 4 careful silver eyes, and a joke that curdled into a legend. They laughed at our boots once. Now half the galaxy learns to march in them.